with TSM.
Thank you very much. Quick shot, 1-1 on the day. Also 1-1 in the head-to-head against TSM. WE crafting a nice little comeback victory after getting down in the early game. But before we get to the gameplay itself, I want to talk about Champion Select because we talk about 957 and this guy on Fighter Champions. Doesn't get the Kled this time, but he gets the Fizz.
I do want to quickly highlight what I think TSM could have banned instead of the Malzahar was the Fizz to continue to target out 957. I feel like his champion pool has been well scouted by this tournament, and this was kind of a massive oversight. I understand why they took the Malzahar away from the bin, or away from the, reverse that, why they took Malzahar away from bin, but ultimately I think that they just gave away too many weapons to 957.
Yeah, I think TSM played poorly, and W deserves credit for the victory, especially getting ahead on Fizz. But I also don't want to see TSM allowing Lulu and Karma into Champion Select for the rest of the tournament. Every time they trade Lulu and Karma, they're losing the bottom side, and having an Enchanter to enhance the AD who's always ahead in games continually costs them. They banned those two against G2. That's when they won. They did not do it here, and I think that was a big part of their loss.
And the argument there, of course, is that we don't feel like they can actually run both, which is what a team like SKT would love to do, just to empower Bang or to empower a hyper carry player. We haven't necessarily seen Wild Turtle really demand that level of supporting, so having both, trading doesn't seem to work for them either. And you come back to WE. I predicted WE because I thought, okay, they largely can play when they get ahead in the early game. They play an ordered game. A lot of this game made a lot of sense from WE, even though they did actually make that mistake, even though they did fall behind TSM very early.
Yeah, well, so let's get into that then. Our Acer replay. Here's the 3-for-0 that gets WE back into the game after handing over an early lead.
Yeah, these were happier times before this happened. Sven jumping over the wall when Ashe is in base was just completely disorganized, and WE do a good job to counter it because they have everybody there.
I like how they disengaged the Galio ult as well. No one was opting into the very obvious baiting in terms of giving him and positioning into fights in general. We weren't seeing multi-man Galio ults at all. And then from there, closest targets, very easy when you have consistent damage from Taliyah, good target selection across the rift because they had 957 to dive the turret. And again, a lot of ordered play from this moment forward for WE.
And also so many comfort champions for Team WE. You know, Condi going to his signature pick in Lee Sin. CA on his Taliyah was very well known in the LPL. He was one of the first mid laners to actually bring it to that region. And Mystic going back to the Caitlyn. You know, he was hovering between a couple of AD carry champions. So it just felt like Team WE backs against the wall. They're like, let's calm down. Let's remember what we're good at. And let's just play a very fundamental standard game.
Yeah, and as the 6th game they've played here at MSI, this was one of the more calmer performances they've had. It wasn't the super hectic early game. They got a little bit ahead, but they did continually extend that lead. 5,000, 10,000, 8,000, then 12,000, but it was much cleaner than the other ones they've played.
I mean, when we've seen up and down performances, it's very easy to forget that these are, of course, the champions of their regions. SKT accepted, of course. Everyone else has kind of gone one-on-one more than they'd want to. There hasn't been a lot of streaks. And what you really feel and what you learn as an analyst, that the recency bias of, well, how they played earlier today, you know, can they get back from that? All these teams are smart, have settled rosters, have had their backs against the wall in the past, and have veteran status in many ways. And that's why it feels like, judging from their most recent performance, it's feeling more like a trap for us rather than necessarily a trend.
I love that point because you talk about resilience, Jat, and you talk about how G2 showed a lot of resilience as compared to past iterations of this roster at international tournaments. I mean, that's a trait shared by all the teams at this tournament. They've all been knocked down a peg at some point and then found a way to craft victories after that. Of course, we'll have the same questions with TSM. How will they react to this loss going into tomorrow? But I, at least, am excited by the fact that, yes, I feel like every one of your predictions are basically 50-50, at least from where I'm standing.
I mean, it's just, we don't expect collapses. None of these teams are expected to collapse because they've been so regionally dominant that, sure, there will be the sidesteps, but they'll come firing back at some point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because all of these teams have pretty much had an opportunity to collapse, right? Both WE and TSM in the same day lost to Gigabyte Marines and then beat either WE or TSM. You look at Flash Wolves, they went 0-2, they bounced back 2-0. Now they're down again, right? G2 lost to Heartbreaker TSM, a nearly perfect game. Flash Wolves, literally every team, aside from SKT because they never lose, has had to bounce back from adversity.
But I think that if we want to pinpoint like where they're bouncing back, it's not just like a mentality thing, because that's obviously subjective from us, but it's like draft in particular. Like teams will have a terrible draft, you know, they throw away all of their strong points, they're shortchanging where they actually have their win conditions in terms of their positions, where they're giving responsibility, and then it feels like the game that they come back and like, okay, let's remember, right, we play through our solo laners, we play through roaming mid laners, we play through roaming supports, and they get everyone back in order.
All right, well, we moved away from the game a little bit. I'm going to steer us right back for our final replay. As Zale mentioned, that was probably the game-breaking fight here. The face check from Wild Turtle punished.
There are so many different ways that you could face check safely into this. You have Hawkshot, you probably had your blue trinket, you have Haunter on Galio, and they just picked the one way that would just cause utter disaster.
Yeah, and this was a trend in this game where it didn't feel like TSM was actually communicating that well. As Turtle was checking that brush, they were placing a control ward in the top of the pit. Not to mention, Haunter's a real tank on Galio who does have a Lulu backing him up. So there's, as you mentioned, so many ways they could defend. Yes, TSM kind of bounces back in between games, but I really don't feel like they're bouncing back very well in-game. Once something goes wrong, it does seem like the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, of course, Wild Turtle shouldn't have gotten caught there, but even when he got caught, you have the Galio ultimate. It didn't come in, right? We saw exhaust not being used in fights, and I feel like if there's an item here at this tournament that's being underutilized, it's got to be Knight's Vow, especially when you're looking at things like Fizz diving in on an Ashe, and you've got a Galio who should be happy to build that item.
I mean, after the first couple of items, triple Doran, Sunfire situationally, a Spirit Visage situationally, Knight's Vow is, fits right in. You can go very utility as a true tank when you've already got 40% damage reduction, and adding a little bit extra would have gone certainly not amiss.
Right, in that case, I think I'm not sure about the Iceborne. Would have liked to see the Knight's Vow, but that's neither here nor there. WE pick up a very nice victory. Now to put a button on this one, we're going to send it down to Shox for the inside word from WE's mid laner.
Thank you very much, guys. I'm joined here by the mid laner for Team WE after that victory over TSM. And as this was a rematch from Monday, I'd love to know what the focus was of the team going in.
那么这次是第二次遇到 TSM， 那么这场比赛你的重点是什么？
我的重点就是因为上一次跟 TSM 交手的时候失误很多，然后这次尽量减少自己的失误，然后希望能开一下比赛。
So the last match he made too many mistakes. So this game around he just tried to minimize his mistake and carry the game.
Well, you had a fantastic game on Talia, that has to be said, and I'd love to know what your experience was in the 2 games overall of playing versus Bjergsen.
那么你和比尔森已经交手2盘了，那想问一下你跟他交手有什么样的感想吧？
比尔森的话，因为我们这2盘都是用了比较偏发育的英雄，所以对线的话比较平稳。但比尔森这个人就给我的感觉，他一直以来都很强，然后状态一直很稳定，不管是对线还是打团都很稳定。
So they both pick a farming champion like towards the late game. So in the laning phase it's all right, but he felt like Bjergsen is a really strong laner, and he's also really good in team fights. So he's a really strong opponent.
Okay, well, now you guys end the day on 3-3. That means you still have a good chance to get into the next round, and all the opponents are very, very close together. So what are your expectations for the continuation and for making it to the next round? Sorry.
那么现在呢，你们是3-3了。那么很多队伍现在其实都差不多。那么接下来的比赛，你有什么样的期待？然后你觉得你们怎么样？
因为现在很多队伍都3-3了，然后我们这2天发挥其实算一般般，希望我们后面的发挥能更好，然后争取把所有比赛都赢下来。
So yeah, they're currently not performing so well. There are a lot of up and downs. He wishes in the future games he can play more consistently and perhaps to win all the rest of the games.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Jie. And 3-3 in the group stage so far. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much, Shox. I'm pretty sure consistency is something that all of the teams not SKT are hoping for, or at least that they'll find soon enough in the tournament. But with the back half of the MSI group stage underway, we have a team locked in for the next week's bracket stage, and that would be SK Telecom T1. They can secure the first seed with 2 wins tomorrow, so we'll see if they do it. G2 Esports and Team WE are sitting at 3-3. Flash Wolves, Gigabyte Marines, and TSM behind them with 2 wins each. We'll see if anyone can bring themselves closer to joining SKT in the bracket stage tomorrow. First up, we have Team WE versus G2 Esports, followed by another rematch between TSM and the Gigabyte Marines. That'll make it 7 games between the 2 squads. But it's time for us to turn the lights out. Before we do, actually, I'm going to turn to you guys because we've got that narrowing race towards that 2nd, 3rd, and 4th slots, assuming that SKT continues to dominate. How do you guys feel about how the standings are shaping up now that we've got a couple teams at 3-3 and a few right behind them?
Yeah, the lame answer is I feel like the 2 teams at 3-3 are actually most likely to be 2nd and 3rd, not because of their record, but because it seems like those teams are the closest to figuring out a play style. G2 has been fairly singular in their style the whole time, and just today we got to see them add that aggression in the early game, and we just talked a whole bunch about Team WE, who's looking more like themselves here, and I can't say the same about the teams below them.
I mean, I agree with the consensus, WE, G2, and X, but then again, the consensus before this tournament started was that they'd be the Flash Wolves right up there, so consensus can still be traps. We still do have a lot of matches. The only team that's played twice against SKT is the Gigabyte Marines. So they're the only team to have, that locked in 2 losses, I guess.
That means they've got the easiest schedule from
Exactly.
here on out.
Which, again, doesn't mean a lot. We still aren't clear. There's still so many questions. So right now, definitely would say WE and G2, but apart from that, who's to say?
Anyone's game.
Yeah, the only strong consensus that I have really is that Flash Wolves are continuing to struggle, which is fairly obvious, but I feel like it's mostly because of MMD. Until the team can figure out how to hide him, I don't really see them making top 4 at this point.
Right, well, if this tournament has proven anything, it's that predictions can be broken. So we'll see if that is done later in this week. It's time now for us to turn off the lights here in Rio. So for myself and everyone here bringing you the 2017 Midseason Invitational, thank you for joining us. Good night and GG.